This neon-infested freak show is the sprawling city of Las Vegas. When you think of this place, you immediately think of the casinos and resorts, and literally every heist movie from the early 2000s. But when it comes to escaping to a world where you're free to become an animal, there really is no better place than Sin City itself. Which I suppose is why Formula 1 has taken such a liking to it. I mean, grotesque amounts of money, flagrant disregard for basic decency. All we need is for Las Vegas to have a complete blasé attitude toward human rights, and they're right up there with Formula 1 itself. But of course, they've already tried that. They have staged a race in Las Vegas previously, and what resulted was such an appalling mess, with the only saving grace being the podium placing of Bruno Giacomelli, the greatest driver to have ever walked the earth and who will ever walk the earth. Despite being a monumental failure, however, Formula 1 are still looking to return to this joint, still trying to make it 3 American Grand Prix on the calendar, just like what it was when Las Vegas was previously on the calendar. Is that a good thing though? And do we even need it? Well, let's have a look at the shit, shall we? So first off, let's have a history lesson. At the end of 1980, the F1 season concluded at Watkins Glen International in upstate New York. Despite being a popular track, the cost associated with the 1971 rebuild was still being paid off. And with Formula 1 becoming increasingly interested in money, the track could not afford the sanctioning fees to keep the race and essentially told F1, "F it, we can't do this anymore. Go take over the world someplace else." By the time the 80s came into effect, it was in this time that F1's full-on Americagasm had started. They looked all across the states to find hosts for a race. They already had something in Los Angeles, with the United States Grand Prix West taking place in Long Beach. They were also looking to Detroit and New York, presumably to produce a Murder Capitals of America League of the Championship, and would later venture onto places like Dallas and Phoenix because, honestly, who's ever heard of places like Chicago or Miami? In all of this, however, the hierarchy of Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas looked at Formula 1 and thought, yes. I suppose it was an appetizing thought at first, to host a Formula 1 race in their own backyard. After wasting money on a crappy race on a crappy circuit, they would venture onto the casinos and lose the rest of their money on the house. I mean, I would say that's a dastardly, treacherous thing to do, but this is Las Vegas, and this is motorsport. That sort of shit goes hand in hand. Rather than hosting the race on the actual streets of Las Vegas, it was instead held in the Caesars Palace parking lot. Back in a time where Las Vegas had more exposure than even it would deem acceptable, being confined to a parking lot meant the designers had virtually nothing to work with. Almost no elevation, no camber, and with it being in America in the 80s, almost no Formula 1 fans. But that's okay then. There would be fans flocking from all corners of the globe, right? You would think that, but as we'll discover later on, that really wasn't the case. It was built in just 5 weeks at a cost of $3.5 million. It was run in an anti-clockwise direction, which put a tremendous strain on the drivers' necks, having been so used to racing on circuits that went in a clockwise direction. It had 14 corners, about as much as one can pack into this amount of space, and kind of resembled the Road America logo. Not that this track and Road America should ever be put in the same sentence. The nature of the circuit, as well as the heat provided by the Nevada sun being out here in the middle of the f***ing desert, meant that it would take a toll on the drivers in the races. The racing provided wasn't terrible, but given America had tracks like Laguna Seca and Road America, the lure of money made this the more viable, nay, the only real option for Formula 1. Which sucked because for 1981 and 1982, the track would host the finale of 2 incredible seasons of the sport. The 1981 title fight was down to Carlos Reutemann at Williams and Nelson Piquet at Brabham. Come the dais, and the Caesars Palace Grand Prix would be where all the drivers put their chips on the table. Pun not intended, my humour sucks, but it ain't that dry. Anyways, 4th gear on Carlos Reutemann's car decided to end its season early. This meant he started to drown mid-race, allowing Piquet to scythe through and win the title. The race wasn't especially amazing, save for the incredible podium placing of the all-time GOAT, Bruno Giacomelli. I can explain why this guy's the GOAT, even though I really shouldn't have to. Although if you're not familiar with this guy's greatness, check out this book by Josh Wilcock, it's in the description. This ain't a sponsorship, this is just camaraderie because I'm just such a nice guy. Anyway, this didn't make up for the fact that the circuit was bland and short of character. That's why when you look at the Wikipedia article for this Grand Prix, it simply reads, no. But of course, this didn't stop them from coming back the next year. 1982 was a completely off-the-wall season that deserves its own video, but in a basic sense, Ferrari, Renault, and Brabham had the best cars that year. Their turbocharged power units completely destroyed the naturally aspirated dinosaurs that virtually everyone else used. Thing is, however, all 3 of these constructors hit problems during that season. The Ferrari team tragically lost both drivers mid-season, with Gilles Villeneuve dying at Zolder and Didier Pironi's career-ending crash at Hockenheim. The Renaults were really far fast, but the only thing that beat their pole position tally was the amount of turbos they blew, and retiring from a Grand Prix is not the most practical means to score points. Brabham wasn't much better either. They had defending champion Nelson Piquet, but it didn't matter too much when the BMW engine in his car decided to become a burn barrel and put itself on strike. Filter all this out, and by the end of the season, the title fight was down to John Watson in the McLaren and Keke Rosberg in the Williams. Thought to have had no chance at the beginning of the year, they were now the two fighting for the title. The race would be won by Michele Alboreto in his Tyrrell, which not a lot of people saw coming. Meanwhile, Watson performed his usual trick of starting the race poorly so he can make his way back up the field and finish the race beautifully. He did well to finish second, although the championship battle fell in favour of Rosberg. Again, the race wasn't insultingly bad, but for it to be the conclusion of that season was pretty hollow, and the lack of people in the grandstands kinda showed that there wasn't much appetite for this race. So once the circus left, Caesar's Palace decided they really couldn't be arsed with the sport anymore, and thus left Las Vegas out of the F1 picture forevermore. Until Formula 1 remembered that they enjoyed prostituting themselves to the highest bidder, and that Las Vegas was still a hub for shitloads of money. Ever since 1995, there were rumours of a race taking place along the strip, and when Liberty Media bought Formula 1, these same rumours began to pick up again. Now starting from next year, the F1 calendar will have races in Austin, as per usual, as well as Miami, with what looks to be a pretty rancid temporary course running around Hard Rock Stadium. This marks the first time since 1984 that there have been two American Grand Prix on the calendar, but Stefano Domenicali seems to have the same lust for America that the sport had back in the 80s. In an interview at the start of the year, he declared that there were two other American cities that had expressed interest in hosting a Grand Prix. One of them is Las Vegas, and once again, they're looking to involve the strip in some capacity. But the thing is, there has been a history of proposals to bring F1 back to Las Vegas, and it just never seems to get off the ground. The last time someone struggled this badly with the race was in New York, and of course, that fell apart quite horrifically. So what in the hell would make us think that this would be any different? You could argue that the increased interest in America as of late would help make this a possibility, but with even less space on the calendar thanks to the additions of Qatar and Miami, and with the desperately needed additions of places like Africa, is there even any room for a Grand Prix like this? And more to the point, do we need a Grand Prix like this? It wouldn't be the first time F1 wasted money on a trip to Las Vegas, although this time they should just go through the traditional means and lose it all on the house. In the casinos, not in their parking lots. You feel me? Anyways, thank you all for watching. Drop a comment below, subscribe to the channel if you're awesome, and always remember, keep it respectful, be wholesome, don't be a marnus, and as always, I'll see you all later.